Hello everybody, welcome to the Video Game Movies Shouldn't Suck panel. Thank you for coming to support the cause and to fuel the anger that we all have towards this dire situation. Let our panel's going to introduce themselves. I'm Eddie LeBron of Blue Force Studios. I directed a bunch of video game fan films. Mega Man! Yeah, Mega Man and Sonic 1 starring Jaleel White, and next week on Screw Attack we're releasing CBC Chun-Li vs. Cammy. This week? Oh yeah, it's a Sunday. This week, yeah. This Tuesday. So let our panel introduce themselves.
Alright, I'm David Horowitz, and yeah. Was anybody on the 10th floor last night?
No.
I was on many floors.
It's an interesting story we might save for the end as an end of the day story.
Hey, I'm Chris Bain. I am the writer-director of Metal Gear Office, and I also work on the majority of Blue Core projects as writer, director, crew member, what have you.
As do I.
I'm Brent Black, aka Brent of Loss. I don't have any actual film credentials, but I will say that, you know, when it comes to watching bad video game movies, my tears are my degree. So thanks for doing that.
And funny enough, we met like face-to-face approximately a year ago because of the Mega Man movie, and the first thing we talked about was the first movie we're going to talk about. But let's get on with this, which is video game movies shouldn't suck. That's a pretty straightforward thing. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through a brief history of the various video game movies and how they shaped the history of the video game movie, mainly because you think of the first major comic book movie, Superman, and how big a success that was, and just the chain reaction of video game comic book movies after that, like Batman, and then things went off a little wonky, Spider-Man. It's just, right now, comic book movies are now seen a little more legitimately than they were, you know, decades ago. As for video game movies, they're looked down upon, mainly because of the very shady history, which all began with a very sad event in history, which was the... Yeah.
I love that movie!
So, where do we begin with this? Because I know, right, this was the first thing, we went to a brief conversation about Super Mario Brothers when we first met. You were like, you're that Mega Man guy, and then you started asking questions about...
You said, you're that Mega Man guy.
And then,
I have no vocal inflection now, so I can't be funny. You were saying?
I didn't know you were sitting next to me at that table, so...
Right, I didn't know, yeah, it was kind of like, oh, we've been eating for an hour, holy crap, it's you.
Yeah, so the first thing you and I briefly talked about was how Super Mario Brothers was handled, and then you're like, Eddie, we need to talk. Because I know, I think out of many of the video game movies, that kind of pissed you off the most. Because I've seen a lot of...
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, it was the first violation. It was the hardest hit. I didn't have any scars to protect me from that. So, I mean, it was awful.
Well, it was also, it's interesting because comic book movies started with one of the biggest characters, Superman, so video game movies started with probably the biggest franchise at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And aside from a horrendous production, falling behind schedule, directors were throwing coffee on the extras. It was quite a mess, and but oddly enough, the public wasn't too familiar with that back in '93, and a trailer was released, and I'm going to show you this trailer just so I can tell you the impact this trailer had back in '93. So here we go.
Already like that.
Yeah. All the kids in '90s freaked out.
Where are we? I got a feeling we're not in Brooklyn no more. They're brothers. They're plumbers. They're on the trail of a kidnapped princess.
and a mystical meteorite. It's incredible! Its senses the power to rule the universe. Give me the rock! Get him with this breath! Now, they must rescue the princess. And make it safely back. Later, alligators, to our world. Are you alright? Before time runs out. Super Mario Brothers. This is a game.
Now Dennis Hopper is back.
Now, for those that were around in '93, I remember it slightly vaguely because I'm a youngster, but I still remember the times, and I've talked to people a little bit, yeah, like you, which this trailer surprisingly got a lot of people pumped about the movie, and I'm trying to figure out why until I realized, if you watch that trailer, you'll realize, and you probably guys do, that no shot lasts more than a second. It's subliminal, it's hard-hitting, it's just very, quick cutting. You can't process it, especially if it's the first time you've seen it. You can't exactly process what you're seeing. So, you see two guys that kind of look like Mario and Luigi, you see dinosaurs, and you see a giant lizard reptilian, which, oh, it's Bowser, it's King Koopa, oh my goodness. So, for youngsters, for youngsters that are very hungry, and at the time, I don't know if we could assume that Dennis Hopper was King Koopa, but hey, I see Dennis Hopper. I don't know who he is, but he's cool and he's got interesting hair. But then the movie was released, and so the movie was released, and what are our initial opinions? Let's go back to '93, or as early as we've ever watched it in a count. Let's start with you, David.
I loved it because I never played Mario at that time. So I thought it was a nice science fiction film. A little crazy though, but
Yeah, I didn't play Mario that much around the time that came out. I remember watching the movie all the time though, and I loved it. It was like the best movie ever. And I had nothing to compare it to because I didn't play Mario that much. And basically all I knew was that it was based off of a video game, and I assumed that they just made changes to make it work for the movie, but at the time I loved it.
No, I'm not going to do that to you.
You want to go back to those days in history and count this?
Okay. So, not to be a fanboy of Mario, but at the time we were in 1993. There was a lot of the arguments that say this movie was good come from people that didn't play a lot of Mario, which is like, I don't know. To me, I think it's a fair argument, but this was not really marketed towards those people. I don't think anyway. They didn't make it. Okay, I'm going to start over. Here's the thing. There were like 3 different cartoons that established Mario and Luigi as, guys that both had mustaches. Fancy that. That went to a place called the Mushroom Kingdom that saved Princess Toadstool at the time, who eventually became Peach, but was definitely not Daisy, except in one game. There was a whole series of Valiant comic books where Mario was the brave one and Luigi was not, and they reversed that for no reason. My main beef with the film is that it doesn't validate the mythos that was laid out before the movie had happened, and there was almost, maybe not 10, but like 7 years of mythos to go on that they threw to the wind. That's all. That's how I felt.
Well, I remember loving, not the whole movie, I would replay the last 15 minutes, because that was the first time you see him in the costume when it finally felt like a Mario movie. Right. So, for years, I never saw the first 60 to 75 minutes. Every time I rented the tape, I rewound and rewound. Because, as a 5-year-old, you're playing this and you're like, oh, I don't see him in the costumes yet. Fast forward. And then you get to the 65-minute mark, you're like, oh, hey, it's them, I guess. And then you see some kind of dinosaur, and you're like, oh, that's Bowser, I guess. So I think it's well stated that as kids we have lower standards and you'll settle for anything. So as a Mario fan, I settled. I didn't want to, but there was really no other option. Unlike these gentlemen who didn't play Mario, so they had no standards, and they're like, "Oh, this is a great movie."
Which is actually the reason why I got Super Mario Land for Game Boy. That's actually why I got a Game Boy.
It's really unfortunate, David, but anyway. It's a given that this is kind of... It was released 2 weeks before Jurassic Park, so obviously it didn't do too well in the box office. Jurassic Park was a huge deal at the time.
Their dinosaurs were a little bit better.
The movie underperformed drastically, making only $20 million in its complete run out of a $45 million budget, which went over budget, and had 5 directors. The original 2 directors were known for the 60-minute pilot for Max Headroom, which I saw, and I was very sad when I watched it, and I say, I can imagine these guys doing a Mario movie, and then it clicked in my head, and I was like, oh shit. But the movie didn't do too well. It was critically bashed, and it kind of started the chain reaction, mainly because if Superman didn't do good, I don't think comic book movies would have, because even though it was it was yesteryear, many years ago, it kind of, the first step is the most important. It legitimizes it.
Right, it makes producers less afraid to try that kind of thing.
And they got credible actors, and they got a credible director who did TV for 20 years and just got off The Omen. And I mean, he went on to do The Goonies, so I mean, the guy's immensely talented. And the producers on Super Mario didn't put any money behind it. Bob Hoskins, I thought, was an okay choice, but I still try to understand why they got John Leguizamo's Luigi, especially in my memory, pretty early on in his career. I don't know if...
Yeah, he was relatively unknown at that point.
Yeah, and he still didn't look the role, and it kind of makes you wonder their choices in getting the director. I mean, Max Headroom was very interesting. I don't know if anyone here ever saw because that's a pretty rare thing, but watching it was interesting because it was a whole nother universe, a whole nother world. It combined technology with something that was a little more organic, as opposed to this that's nothing but just Dino Hatton. And it kind of makes you wonder the thought process of the people that did Superman. They were able to, and the weird thing about Superman is those producers were real dicks. They're like the pinnacle Hollywood producer. They're from Europe. They have this whole preconception of how Hollywood film's supposed to work. And yet, these producers were able to assemble a better team than this. And do you know off the top of your head if Nintendo had any involvement in this?
I recently read an article about this. I think the thing is, Miyamoto did sign off, but it was one of those kind of things where they were thinking more in terms of how to make the movie a new experience. And like you said with Max Headroom, there was a lot of innovative technology going into it, but they did so much. I guess we took for granted the fact, and I'm paraphrasing here, so don't Wikipedia me, but or do whatever. The point is, it seems like the one thing that kind of they took for granted was that these people would be able to come up with a good story. Because clearly the special effects for the time were pretty good.
Yeah.
They had some innovative stuff with at the time that whole the going through the portal thing was pretty cool, and the sequence of them falling through the space between was kind of neat. But I think they were thinking more in terms of the visual elements of it, bringing something that seemed as new as Nintendo had seemed 10 years before to the big screen. But I think they took for granted that a story does not always just write itself out of I'm a plumber and I save a princess.
The unfortunate thing is I lost my train of thought. It had to do with the directors. But can you repeat the last thing you said? Because I
said Eddie LeBron is the handsomest man I know. The thing I said was that they took for granted that the story would just write itself with the material they had from the game, much less the mythos universe that had been created around it.
I don't know if it's known, but